process and how we're leveraging our strategic partners in helping us in the development process. But before I got started on that, a number of you have asked me to just cover quickly the technology and operations organization. What is the organization? What are the responsibilities? How is it structured? So I'll do that quickly before I get into the EIN topic. Scott will be here too, Scott Yeager, who will spend some time sort of towards the end of mine to talk, to add a few things to this presentation. So just quickly now, the technology and operations organization. In some ways, I think this whole business unit thing has gotten people a little confused. I think when you think about the technology and operations group, it's almost better to think of it sort of as a center of competence where we sort of house the people with the skills to design and develop systems, basically, is what it amounts to. It's very much a cross-functional group. The people in technology and operations are, for the most part, tasked against projects in the other groups or business units. So in other words, you have people that are working on infrastructure projects, people that are working on product projects, and so forth. So primarily these are projects generated by the other groups or business units. But quickly, the responsibilities of the technology and operations group. One is clearly, since a lot of our partnerships have a huge technology component, the T&O group is responsible for helping foster those strategic alliances. And when I get into the EIN, I'll talk a bit about how we're doing that with Sun, Cisco, and others. Clearly, the group is responsible for creating the infrastructure, both our internal infrastructure that we use as a corporation, things like email and so forth, but also, more importantly, our customer-oriented infrastructure. So the network, the POPs, and the deployment of our technology in the POP locations. Clearly, a mainline function from a project standpoint is providing the software and technology development resources to all the business units. Deploying the technology after we get the POP locations built by David Leatherwood and that group, we have to put the technology in those locations, both our locations as well as our customer ISP POP locations. And then finally, obviously, to provide support to all the customers and partners. Next slide. Go ahead to the next slide. Now, this is basically, if you look at the T&O organization, think of it as 5 broad groups. The first group is product development and engineering, and this is really the group that has the development resources. These are the software developers, the product engineers that have network expertise as well as hardware expertise. So this is the group that helps develop the original product specs, helps develop the technical aspects of the product roadmap, and then does the design and development from there all the way down to the final testing of a product. This is the group that's headed by David Barbarian. Kenny Burrell's group, then the network and service implementation, takes a product and basically does everything that's required to actually tweak that product and deploy it in the POP locations. So this includes things such as traditional network engineering, but also things like the circuit provisioning. Then, of course, we have operations headed by Lorraine Simmons, and the ops group is responsible for both internal and customer-oriented support. So it includes the IT group as well as all the traditional operations functions. Research and technology, essentially Stan Hanks. Stan is responsible for keeping us at the right point on the technology curves in some of these technology areas. And then finally, the software architecture group is headed by Larry Siscon. And really, that's the group that focuses on EIN, as well as the InterAgent components that are part of what we're using to develop the EIN. So we'll spend a lot of time, obviously, in that group. So that's quickly just a high-level overview of technology and operations. Any questions on this part of before I jump into the EIN? Okay. I thought before I get into the EIN specifically, I just want to go back. And now, when you heard from Joe and Ken earlier on strategy, you might have seen some of the slides that I'll use on the EIN, although I'll be talking about them from a different perspective. But quickly, I just wanted to flash this up, again, sort of our strategic goal, because this very much influences what we're doing with EIN and how we're making trade-offs in terms of when we roll in the various types of EIN functionality. But basically, our goal is to become the leading e-business platform. And so we're doing that by building a richer end-to-end internet experience, even across networks that we don't completely own. Obviously, we're rolling out quickly to get the reach. We're building applications on top of our infrastructure. More importantly, we're partnering with people to help us build these applications. And then we're doing this with a new business model. And I put this up because, again, the EIN is a part of what is making this strategy possible. In other words, we're trying to make the strategy drive what we do with the EIN and not vice versa. Next slide. Again, you've probably seen this slide earlier. If you look at sort of the pillars of our business, the bandwidth trading and the other ways that we source bandwidth is a part of our business. We then, of course, have the applications that we put on top of it. And then in the middle, we have this thing called the intelligent network, which is sort of the platform that helps make all of this possible. It's one of the things that's unique about our business in terms of the breadth by which we think about an intelligent network. And we'll get into those in more details. So next, basically then, what is this thing called the EIN? I guess the easiest way to talk about this, and by the way, this is very much a conceptual diagram, so don't think of this as sort of a spec or a technical architecture diagram. There are obviously is a lot more complexity to the way that you actually roll it out from a software and engineering perspective. But conceptually, if we start from the bottom, you know that we're sort of the first company of our scale to roll out a pure IP network, so we're putting the IP right on the glass. But so we have this physical infrastructure level, and on top of that, we're putting distributed servers. The servers are basically the platform upon which the EIN software resides. So the EIN technology itself is composed of a number of services or utilities that we're actually embedding in our network. And these are services that are needed by basically anyone that's building a wide area network-based application has to include some subset of these services in that application. When we talk to people like IBM and EDS and other folks that are in the business of building e-business applications for customers, one of the things we hear from them is that they have to build a lot of these services over and over again each time they build an e-business application. So what we're doing is taking some of these common services that are needed and embedding them in our network. And then we're providing an API, which is basically a function set that developers can write to, that give them access to all this functionality. So basically it means that they can now focus on the business aspects of an e-commerce application, and whenever they need, say, a directory service function, we have a sort of a function set that they just sort of call at a high level, and they're able to plug it in natively into our network. I have some of the types of functions that we're building into the EIN here, although the list is much bigger, but these are some of the important ones. I mean, clearly things like directory services are going to be crucial to us. Things like metering and billing. QoS control is something that's very unique to the way we think about QoS. In fact, is very different from other communications companies. Scheduling, our ability to actually reserve bandwidth at a future time and then configure the network to make it so at the right time. So in a sense, if you're looking downward from the EIN layer downward, the EIN is like a control system. We actually have interfaces to the various network devices such that we can change configurations dynamically. Then if you're looking upward, it is sort of a programming interface that again, developers can write to, whether it's an ISV, an independent software vendor, or an ASP. Now this thing called InterAgent is a real-time middleware product. It came from Modulus. I was at Modulus when we were acquired by Enron Communications. And basically InterAgent, like I say, is a middleware technology which is sort of the glue layer for the EIN. So in other words, it's the layer that provides the communication between the various modules that we build for the EIN. And then the EIN itself, over time, will more and more be a software development kit that we can provide to partners or customers such that they can write their applications to natively plug in to our network. So the idea is, although we're building some applications to get us started and to generate customers, applications that are very powerful and needed by a number of industries. You know, I'm talking about media cast, media support and video conferencing. Ultimately, what we want to do is have a lot of other companies, software vendors, ASPs, using our software development kit and our APIs to write applications that plug into our network. Or at least when I say our network, I mean a network that's EIN enabled, which obviously is going to be much bigger than our network. In fact, why don't you go on to the next slide. Go ahead.
I just want to make sure everybody understands this might be confusing. Media services, those are, we're thinking of as core capabilities of the EIN, whereas today we talk about them as application layer services.
Yeah, that's a real good point. I put them here specifically to emphasize that point. Right now, when we think about MediaCast and media transport, we think of them as products that we're selling to customers, which of course we're doing. But ultimately, those will be yet another series of capabilities which will just natively be a part of the EIN. So in the future, if an e-commerce, say someone's building some sort of financial e-commerce application, the capabilities of streaming and transport will be available to them via EIN API. So it's yet another more sophisticated level of service that we're building into the EIN as opposed to just a standalone product. Because our vision is things like streaming and large file transport are going to be just standard capabilities that a multitude of applications will need. So we've cleverly built those early on and have customers for them, but like I say, ultimately they will serve a number of different industries. Does that make sense? I thought I would go through this, and again, I don't know if you saw this earlier with Joe and Ken, but just to emphasize, now how are we actually deploying the EIN after we're building it? You know that we're building our POPs in various cities around the country and eventually around the world. So clearly, as we build our POP locations, we connect them via our pure IP layer, and then we put the servers in our city POPs. Go on to the next one. Then what we do, of course, is we are signing up as partners and distributors, ISP, CLEX, and hopefully ultimately RBox. And the important point here is that we're fitting out their POP locations with those Sun servers, and on those Sun servers we're putting our EIN technology. So the idea is that we can't own all the network in the world, but maybe we can put our software in every POP location in the world. At least that's a more achievable goal than physically owning all the network. And the idea is that wherever our technology is, we can influence the network. So our network, in essence, becomes every place we have our technology, whether we own the physical infrastructure or not. So basically, once we have an end-to-end profile via our technology, we basically now can sort of provide an enhanced internet experience, even across networks that we don't physically own. I mean, it makes simple logical sense, and I mean, basically this is done time and time again in enterprise situations where various networks are tied together via technology, but what we're doing is taking it sort of on a much broader scale.
Are there any white papers that give an overview of InterAgent and its features?
Yeah, we actually have a series of white papers on InterAgent, which we can get to you. I think what we need is basically more white papers on EIN. Increasingly, I mean, if you start with InterAgent, that'll give you a good background about sort of the event engine and the messaging layer that's tying it all together. But basically, we're adding so many new components as we build the EIN that it's becoming sort of the importance of InterAgent as a component technology. I mean, it's still important as a glue, but more and more it's being overwhelmed by the functionality that we're now adding to it, through the development that's going on ourselves and with our partners.
But a good way to think of it is that we couldn't as easily grab somebody else's software and assimilate it in to make it part of EIN if we didn't have some messaging component that would allow us to do that was event-based and publish and subscribe. And that's what InterAgent does for us. So it lets us grab other stuff and more or less enable it rapidly, much more rapidly than anybody else could.
Well, the interesting thing about it, too, is obviously, as we go through and are building all this, we're working closely with partners. I mean, Sun and Cisco are the obvious examples, and we're talking to just a multitude of others. The fact that we have this software mindset and the fact that we own a software product called InterAgent has really given us a lot of credibility with those technology partners, because they perceive us as clearly more than a customer. We're sort of a value-added partner. We actually think about their products and their technology and how we can enhance it, but at the same time benefit our own network. So I think it's enabled us to build partnerships of a type that are probably much more difficult for other communications companies to do. I don't know if, I think you probably heard that Sun, of course, has licensed InterAgent. So InterAgent is basically their core message-oriented middleware product. They have rebranded the Java version of InterAgent as JMQ, Java Messaging Queue. And in fact, they will be releasing that to a select pre-release series of customers the early part of September, and will be releasing it as a general commercial product the first part of October. And then they are also rolling InterAgent into a number of their other products, including the Java Embedded Server, in fact, their entire software server line of products. So, and I go through that because it really, we've been able to leverage that in terms of the way that we work with Sun in helping us with the EIN. Like I say, it's given us a lot of credibility with their engineers, and now they are being very helpful with sort of moving their products in the direction that benefits us from an EIN standpoint. It's somewhat similar with Cisco. In fact, one of the things that we've been able to achieve with Cisco that's very different is they actually now have a couple of projects going on, one focused on bandwidth trading, one focused on the EIN, where they basically assigned a group of people and they've sort of given it the same visibility that they would one of their own products, internal products. And for those of you who know Cisco, that's been a very difficult thing to achieve, because Cisco, if nothing else, is very focused on sort of product releases. So to get any attention outside of a product release from a group like Cisco is a big achievement. Now, it remains to be seen how successful we'll be in the long run, but to have gotten this far with them is great news for us. Go on to the next one. All I was doing here, and again, you've sort of seen this one in terms of the scale. Really, what I wanted to emphasize here is, again, we're putting that EIN technology everywhere that we're outfitting a POP, whether it's our POP or a partner's POP. So if you look at the gross level goals, by the end of next year, well, and actually this is conservative because we were doing this for analysts, but 45 of our city POPs, and we hope it's more like 75, and then 500 partner ISP POPs, and hopefully it's at least double that, and that's not including the satellite POPs. And it doesn't matter to us, by the way, whether or not we're sending this our information over a satellite or terrestrial link, as long as we have a server at a POP location. We don't really care what the transmission medium is. Next slide. These I don't really need to go into it, but my point was, and I've already made it, is that as we develop this initial suite of products, really think of these as fundamental capabilities that we also roll on top of the EIN. So these are like the next level of services beyond those low level of services on the EIN. What will go on top of these are even a set of APIs that are more vertically focused in terms of vertical industries. So, for instance, we've already talked to a number of companies that want to help us in certain vertical industry, such that we have, say, a financial service subset of the EIN API that's particularly useful to that industry, and so forth. So there is a sort of a hierarchy of APIs as well.
I know we're pressed for time. I just wanted to ask you if there are folks in Houston that are working on developing hooks in the API for teleconferencing, like application development beyond the teleconferencing, like adding web features and things like that. If that's a main charter that people up to Houston now, working on specific applications that would go with video conferencing.
No, go ahead.
Yeah, that's what we use application service providers for.
Right.
we work with application service providers who want to create a suite of video conferencing services.
So we're not doing that.
We don't want to do that directly.
Yeah.
Part of it's just, I mean, we have to leverage as much as we can other software companies. I mean, ultimately, just even if we had unlimited resources, which clearly we don't, I mean, just given the pace of change in this industry, part of the game is how quickly now can we really sign up ISVs and ASPs. Because you can imagine, I mean, I've gone over this at a very high level, but what we're doing with the EIN is truly, industry changing in terms of the breadth, and therefore it's very complex. So really doing this and managing our partners, the partners that are working with us at that sort of EIN level, is extremely challenging. Now at the same time, when we have an opportunity to develop an application that's sort of unique or uses the EIN in a way that it would be very difficult for us to sign up an ISV to do, we would want to do that. But really more and more the game for us is going to be how can we encourage more and more software companies to be using that API in writing to our network. In the long run, we are working with Sun, Cisco, and others to take the API to industry standards bodies. So we have to figure out over time how and when we roll that out. But part of the reason why they're enthusiastically working with us is because they do see an opportunity here to take this API to the standards bodies like the IETF and and make it ubiquitous.
I got 2 minutes.
Yeah, that's it.